He may be a precinct worker or a president. He may give his talents at the courthouse, the state house, the White House. He may be a civil servant or a senator, a candidate or a campaign worker, a winner or a loser. But he must be a participant and not a spectator.
Hey, Senator, Mayor, good afternoon. Thanks a lot for coming. My name is Mike. I'm in the Marines, and I drove down here from Cherry Point. And I currently live in Havelock, and my family lives in South Florida. And so after post-Katrina, the disaster relief effort, was kind of an issue for me because of, what went on there. And I was just curious as to what you think should be done on the state and federal level to aid in disaster relief post-Katrina to change and augment the way things were done there.
You want to go first?
Sure. I have a little personal experience in this. I was mayor of Raleigh when Fran hit in '96. Now, what Fran did to Raleigh cannot in any way compare to what happened in New Orleans. But a lot of people are pointing their finger at the administration in Washington, and yes, I think the FEMA director, dropped the ball. But ultimately, local governments are responsible for things like this. One of the first things we did in Raleigh when Fran hit was we made sure that our police and fire people, that their families were taken care of so they could pay attention to their jobs. About a third of the police force walked off the job in New Orleans because they had to go look after their families. They had a disaster evacuation plan in place, pages and pages and pages of it that wasn't executed. What I found out when I was mayor of Raleigh was my most important friend in the state was Governor Jim Hunt. And I went to him and I said, you take the lead. Let me know what I need to do. I surrender this to you. You got the resources, you got the manpower, you got the cavalry. They're yours, they're not mine. Let me know what I need to do to help. And what we saw in Katrina was just a perfect storm of lack of cooperation between local and state and federal officials. And it really prolonged and exacerbated the pain and suffering that the people of New Orleans had to endure. Which leads me to a little admonition here. For those of you who want to get involved in politics and government, not everybody can be a United States Senator, and it's a great stage, but I'm telling you, local politics is the most rewarding place to get involved because you can make a difference, you can make a difference quickly, and you can see the difference you make. And none of you are too young, as witnessed the 18-year-old who just got elected mayor in Hillsdale, Michigan. I hope he's doing a great job. I wasn't ready to be a mayor at 18. I hope he is for the constituents of Hillsdale. But local government, what New Orleans needed was more people involved at the local level because, again, government works best when it's closest to the people, and the people in New Orleans knew best what their people needed and how to get it there, and how to best get cooperation from the state and federal officials.
How long have you been in the Marine Corps?
3 years.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. And thank you. And thank you for taking the time to drive up here and be here today. The answer to your question is, my own, at least in my own view, and we have a slightly different view about this. I think the government's response as a whole was completely inadequate to Katrina. And the reason government exists is for these kind of disasters when people, through no fault of their own, get devastated. And that's basically what happened. It happened in Florida, it happened in all along the Gulf Coast, and it certainly happened in New Orleans. The one thing that actually the most encouraging thing about Katrina particularly is not the government's response, but the American people's response, which was really extraordinary. It was, the donations, the volunteers, people going to the area. Here in Raleigh, for example, we took a bunch of folks, evacuees from New Orleans. And I went down to Louisiana after the hurricane. And the other thing that was really encouraging is the incredible strength of people in this country. I mean, it's amazing. I was going through one of the evacuee centers in Baton Rouge. People had come from the 9th Ward in New Orleans, which is the poorest place, the lowest lying place that got hit the worst. And there were a bunch of people in line, and I was going through speaking to each one. And there was this one guy there who was like big, strong-looking guy, probably mid-40s, I'd guess, from looking at him. And I said, "How are you?" And he said, "I'm doing okay." He said, "But I lost my home." He lived in the 9th Ward. And he said, I also lost my job. He said, I worked in this place for 23 years. It's flooded, and now they've told us they're not going to reopen. And he said, I don't know anything but work. It's all I've ever done. You know, I've raised my kids. I've been responsible. And it is important to recognize when you're hearing this story, this guy's sleeping on the floor, basically. I mean, about 15 feet from where we were standing in a sleeping bag. And he said, when I got here, though, they told me if you go out front in the morning at 5 o'clock, that sometimes guys will come by in pickup trucks and pick you up and put you to work. And he said, I've been out there every morning at 5 o'clock. I've been here 10 days now. And he said, they haven't hired me yet, but they're going to. And this is what makes this country what it is. I mean, just the basic belief that people who are out there trying ought to get a chance, and that there's even, no matter how bad it seems, tomorrow's going to be better. But that's where the government comes in. I mean, in order for this to work, and the reason for young people to be engaged is the government has to meet, Tom's right, we expect personal responsibility from everybody. But the country expects their government to be responsible too. I mean, my wife always loved to tell, I don't want to tell political stories, but I will tell one. My wife always loved to tell, during the presidential campaign, when she'd be out campaigning, she said, you know, even today we don't have a comprehensive terrorist watch list for everybody at airports to use to keep people safe so we don't get terrorists getting on airplanes. And she said, it's an amazing thing. This is just disorganized bureaucracy. You know, they don't know what they're doing. And then she said, but to put this in perspective, if you went to any PTA in America and said, I want you to have a unified list, they'd have it 2 days later. And it's the truth. And what we saw in New Orleans and the Gulf Coast was a disorganized, bureaucratic government. It's not like we hadn't had to respond to hurricanes before. I mean, we have, as Tom just mentioned, right here in North Carolina. And it's the government's responsibility to do that. Here, let me give you one last thought. Here's what I'd do if I just had total power to do it myself. What I would do is, I think in the rebuilding process, instead of giving, you know, multi-billion-dollar contracts to these big multinational corporations, which is what's happening, I think instead what we ought to do is hire the people who lost their homes and lost their jobs to go back, those who want to go back and rebuild their city and rebuild their community. So that they've got a decent job, they've got a place to live, they've got decent benefits, get them back on their feet, make them proud of what they're doing. And to me, that would be probably the single most important thing we can do. Now, we're not, unfortunately, doing that yet, at least. But I think if we can give the very people who got devastated a chance to rebuild our own community, it would have a real impact, and a positive impact.